Hello and welcome to Deep in Pact, a deep dive into Wildbow's most unloved work 5 years on. Coming up next is Elliot and
And that was Reuben Morehouse. And before we jump into the chapter today, we just had a bit of an announcement, which is we've gotten together with Speed Chuck, who some of you may know as the guy doing a Pact audiobook. And we've actually helped him set that up as a podcast, so that's available on our website, mediamdpodcast.com.
Yep, you don't need to just listen to it on Bandcamp anymore.
Yes.
You can now search and find the Pact audiobook project on all major podcast players, So if you want to listen along to it while you are kind of diving deeper into Pact with us, then you can find it.
Yep. And so I think there's just 2 episodes up there at the moment, but I believe Speed Chuck's right up to somewhere in Arc 3, so there'll probably be a lot more soon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but no, it should be fun, and this will get his work out there a lot more, and I think take a bit of the maintenance out of his hands, all the housekeeping, and hopefully just let him throw out the audiobook chapters because it's easier.
Yeah,
easier said than done.
Yep, it's well read. It's a good audiobook, and it's a great way to experience it a bit, slower pace, and you don't have to worry about speeding ahead too quickly, like I'm sure a lot of our listeners are doing.
Yep.
So shall we jump into Bonds 1.7, the last non-interlude chapter of Bonds?
Yes, let's do it.
So I guess we need to sum up what happened at the end of 1.6. Blake went upstairs to find a spooky demon, and it wasn't seemingly where it should have been. It wasn't where Granny Rose left it. Blake responds to this pretty great, just by shutting the door and going away.
Yeah. He's just sort of like, oh, okay. And yeah, just runs back down the stairs to tell Rose, I guess.
Yeah, which is a great strategy. This scary demon isn't where I thought it would be. All right, let's just shut this door and head out. Obviously, it makes sense.
I just want to give a little shout out. This episode opens just with the line in italics like, damn it, which is just a nice little throwback to how the first chapter opened. Like, I don't think there's a very significant thematic tie-in between those two that I can think of.
Well,
but
we're ending the first arc as it kind of started, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But I think Blake has a lot more to be angry about in this chapter. And speaking of being angry, Rose gets very angry at him for just heading upstairs to kind of talk to a demon without, running it by her.
I mean, it's hard not to be on her side.
Yeah.
At least at the start of this argument, she raises some pretty good points. He just kind of ran off without her.
Yeah.
Yeah, and unprepared. He claims, he kind of bullshits. He claims he was prepared, and then he says, oh, I thought it might have killed Molly, but I don't remember him ever thinking anything like that. I guess he's just, spoilers, he awakens later in this chapter, and I guess he's just getting some good lies in before he can't do that anymore.
His kind of justification that we get to is that living on the streets, he has honed his instincts, and now he trusts his instincts. So playing Barbatorem's advocate here, I think it's easy to say he didn't think about, he wasn't thinking, this might have killed Molly. He was following his instincts. But I kind of agree with you that he was kind of just making bad decisions, I think.
I mean, also, and Rose kind of calls him out on this a little bit. She takes a slightly different angle, but just because those instincts worked for you on the streets, I don't necessarily think that's going to map very well to all this really dark magic shit. Like that there's not necessarily much of a guarantee that the instincts that work on one work on the other. I have a feeling, this story's quite long, so maybe they do.
I mean, I think that the running theme of the story so far is that magic in this world doesn't work how you would expect it to. And so trusting your instincts means you're going to run right into any kind of magical traps that kind of exist in the way it works.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, he's had a few instances, like his instinct to just keep moving when he first was encountering those bird mask things at the start, that worked out, but his instinct to go out with lead, he probably didn't. So, there's not a general trend one way or the other yet.
Yeah, I'm sure he will learn after he pays some kind of price. So they're arguing for a bit, and then Blake just kind of gets tired of the conversation, wraps it up quickly and starts reading about Barbatorem, and Molly's kind of like, I have more to say here, but, Blake kind of gives her the old book off.
Yeah, he's just kind of like, no, we need to do this now, and you're the one stuck in the mirror. Let's just do what I say.
Yeah, and through reading more about Barbatorem, we get this great bit of world building. And I love this. It's basically like paragraphs and paragraphs describing how Barbatorem works, like how this specific
Yeah.
other functions and the rules for it. And I compare it to like a horror movie where part of the fun of a horror movie is you've got characters in a situation where there's some monster or whatever chasing them, and you know the rules of it, and it seems kind of insurmountable to get away from this monster. But that only works if you know the capabilities of what it can do. You know how they can potentially outsmart it, right? And that's what makes it fun, and that's what makes it tense, is can the characters kind of figure out a way to get around the rules of this thing?
Yeah, definitely.
And that's basically what these, 6 or 7 chapters are. It's just, here's a bunch of rules for how this thing works. Have fun.
Yeah. And this is our first real deep dive into a specific chunk of lore. Like everything I've sort of learnt right now has kind of just been them parroting stuff secondhand or something, but it's all been quite generic, like this is a rule for others. This is a rule for practitioners. This is the first time where we're really focusing in on just one kind of, medium level demon in this world and just getting an idea for all the detail that there is and how terrifying it all is.
Yep. There's a great bit in there about how Rose Senior, lured it by making this big mound of carcasses and putting a young baby as the centerpiece of this bait pile. And obviously, we know which young babies Rose Senior had access to, so it's pretty fun to think about.
Well, I think even Blake makes a joke about how his auntie or uncle gets mentions in the book. My favorite bit though was after it was just when Rose Senior's like, to quote, "The author cannot say whether he was attracted to the virgin aspect or the innocent, but the author was nonetheless happy to have an option at hand that served both purposes."
That's cold, Rose.
Yeah, it's just I do have this 1-year-old child. That'll do.
So, I mean, we're just going to be talking about Barbatorem for a while now, right? Like,
yeah,
shit.
I think so.
So, diving more into these paragraphs, Barbatorem has this great set of horror where I think you kind of expect the more mundane torture level of horror from Wildbow especially. He does a very kind of like to the pain from Princess Bride style thing where he will cut off people's limbs and leave them alive, just kind of limbless and tongueless, trying to desperately survive, right?
Yeah, he manages to injure you a bunch, but then sort of fixes you up just enough so that you'll die of dehydration or starvation before succumbing to the injuries, which is horrifying.
And this is the kind of body horror that we might expect from Wildbow, but then Barbatorem it's kind of juxtaposed with these other messed up things Barbatorem can do, like denying you access to heaven. He can kind of sever your ability to go to heaven, which is fucking bonkers.
Yeah, so, I mean, first of all, that's our kind of more confirmation that there's like a good place and bad place, like we talked about earlier. But yeah, I love this sort of 1-2 punch where Wildbow hits you with all this body horror and you think, oh wow, like Barbatorem's really bad. And then he chucks in the metaphysical horror, which is even worse of, but after he, gives you these horrifying few weeks being half dead, also then you don't get to go to heaven, which is like just even more terrifying because that's eternal.
Yeah, like death won't even save you from this.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing that's cool about this is we get kind of this insight into how practitioners can make different kinds of deals with others, kind of exemplified by Barbatorem, right? So
yeah.
You can make a deal to make Barbatorem be used kind of offensively to go and hunt down a practitioner.
And I think this is what Rose recommends in the textbook.
Yes, because Barbatorem is unique in that he's able to bypass a lot of defenses.
Although
not enter the house of someone who is unawakened.
Hmm.
Or you can use Barbatorem, you can make a deal with him for kind of utility effects, right? So he will offer you expert skill in medicine in exchange for enough blood to make you pass out. He will extend your lifespan by, half or 25 years at the cost of forever smelling blood and rot. Or he can give you ever sharpened blades that never dull in exchange for enough flayed skin to fill 2 cupped hands. And I like that. Again, we kind of seem to get to flayed skin again. So that's great, Wildbow. Twice in one arc, we're talking about flayed skin here.
I just love how it's all written in a such an academic, like, textbook format. Like, all these paragraphs, like, it just really sells Rose Senior as a bit of a psycho, and probably the whole practitioner world as quite psychotic.
Yeah.
Just how it's all, oh yeah, and you know, you can add 25 years to your life, but you'll smell blood and rot and burning hair forever. But
Yeah,
know,
of
who
course. I like the idea of Rose Senior kind of sitting there managing a ledger that's like the exchange rates for what you can get from different demons for different amounts of flayed skin. Like, oh, Barbatorem, you know, you'll give me ever sharpened blades, but for 1.5 cups of flayed skin, I can get, you know, $1,000 from this other demon. So
yeah, haggling the amount of flayed skin.
what about 1.5 cupped hands for blades that never dull? Anyway, so we kind of talk more about some of the others, and Rose, while Blake is reading about Barbatorem, Rose is kind of researching other things that come up. So how to defend yourself against others in general, some history of kind of human relationships with others, who the first people to kind of make deals with others were, and how that started, and just kind of giving us more bits and bobs of backstory that kind of come into it.
Yeah, and it overlaps a bit with stuff we've already sort of heard. Like, I think there are other mentions that alluded to this, and this is the more concrete idea that others all sort of come from somewhere. Like, it doesn't really seem like there's this concept that there are a bunch of others that have existed, you know, since the universe began.
Yeah.
I mean, it even seems to be implying to me that they can start out as mortals or humans and somehow get turned into others.
Mm.
Which, you know, I'm sort of thinking because of the bird skull creatures in the first 2 chapters that, you know, those sort of line up with that idea. But, you know, so it's still a little unclear, but I like this idea that others just aren't eternal. They've all come from somewhere, and ones from different eras will have different properties. Is that the best word?
Abilities? Who knows?
Well, yeah, and so, I mean, I was sort of speculating in the notes here. Like, I wonder if this has something to do with the nukes that everyone's been talking about. Like, it'd be, if Rose Senior had figured out a way to make powerful others, that would certainly be a very powerful skill to have.
I'm pretty sure in either this chapter or the previous one, Blake refers to Barbatorem as one of these nukes, right? Whether that's just his inference or...
Yes.
Or, you know, supported by the text later on or whatever.
Yeah, he calls it a nuke because he was reaching for one of the books he assumes the nukes are in, and the letter falls out that gives him the key to Barbatorem. So he's kind of been working off the assumption that this is part of all that. Do
you have that assumption?
I don't, just because it's only Arc 1. So
sure, things can always get worse.
That's not information Blake has at hand, but yeah, that's sort of. I'm thinking things are going to get a lot worse by the time we figure out what these nukes are.
Yeah. Okay. So you know, they spend the first half of this chapter reading about Barbatorem, and then Blake and Rose decide to start their awakening process to actually become practitioners.
Yes, which I'd kind of misunderstood what this was earlier on, but it's just basically getting magical sight, I guess. It's the first step to being able to use magic, is just being able to see and be aware of it.
Yeah, totally. And kind of doing a ritual to opt into the magical world, right?
Yeah, essentially.
So we get information throughout this whole arc that a number of others and things basically will, for the most part, keep away from unawakened people in order to kind of keep the balance, right?
Yeah, and I think in the 3rd chapter, when Rose Senior gave them the note, she mentioned that becoming a practitioner is kind of like opening a door, and that opens it both ways. And even, I think she even says becoming a practitioner is kind of like becoming a bit of another. So it's definitely you're gaining power, but you're opening yourself up to a lot by becoming a practitioner as well.
Yeah, it's like opting into a pretty dangerous lifestyle, right?
Yes, exactly.
So they first kind of start collecting their ingredients for this ritual.
Yeah.
And there's this interesting bit where it's different from Blake. The ingredients listed for Blake are slightly different to those for Rose.
Yeah. And it's kind of... It's funny because it happens just as they kind of get back on the same page and they're like working together. And then suddenly there's this difference kind of hammered out. And it's like, just to remind you that things here aren't copacetic. Yeah, it's well timed.
Yeah. And so that's a bit of a what the heck is going on kind of moment, but I think we're going to talk about that a bit later. And then they have to choose something that is important to them, right? And we're starting to get on the sense of like, familiars and domains and implements are symbolic to the kind of person they are. And so Blake starts thinking about this and almost chooses a paintbrush. So that prediction from a few chapters back is close. But then chooses the keys to Joel's car, which he still has, which kind of symbolize his friendship and his ownership of things and freedom.
Yeah, well, I hope Joel has a spare set of keys.
Yep.
Also, I like your tie back to how it symbolizes his want to be debt free.
Yeah, totally.
Because that's how he got a hold of those keys, by giving up his actual keys.
Yep. And obviously debts are pretty much on Blake's mind at this point as he's buying into his grandmother's karmic debt.
Yeah, and I'm a little disappointed we didn't get to see what Rose picked for her awakening. Blake almost gets a look, but he doesn't snoop hard enough, and I'm a little disappointed in him for not being snoopy enough.
Yeah. I mean, I guess he's a bit in his own head about the ritual this time. So they get naked again for the second time in this arc, and start basically reading this ritual from a book. And it has the ritual in its original language, the phonetic spelling and the English meaning. And it's great, the escalation of this ritual. They start off reading the words, kind of struggling to pronounce the phonetic meanings of them and not really knowing what they're saying. But as they kind of continue, you get this sense that the magic kind of starts entering their bodies and they just kind of become innately aware of the ritual. They just kind of know what to do, right?
Yeah, well, and there's this whole thing, like, first the bowls that they've put all around them just start moving, then some of them start sinking into the floor to the point where Blake doesn't even want to look at it because he's worried it'll, like, break his brain. And it just sort of keeps getting, like, there's this escalation in the sense that, like, reality keeps getting weirder and weirder as they go on. They're getting, but at the same time, they're getting more and more comfortable with what's happening. So it's sort of, very sort of tracks how they're entering this new world.
Yeah, and there's a great bit as the bowls kind of pass in front of them where they start reciting what the things in these bowls represent.
Yeah, it becomes like a little bit of a word association game. Rather than reciting. And I love, it's a great way to sort of talk about how Blake and Rose are different. Like, they start off the same. They both say the dagger means war. They both say the hourglass means time, which, those are fairly easy ones. Then there's a skull, and I think Blake says doom, and Rose says death, which is pretty similar,
basically
but
the same.
A little bit different. And then we get a coin, and this is really their first one. I think Blake calls it fortune, and Rose says ruin, which I think really highlights, in her timeline, she was one of the women involved with this whole inheritance bullshit. And so she must just associate money with, everything going wrong from that. And then there's a lifeless Rose, which, Blake likens to his family, which, seems to be how he thinks of his family, so that's fair. And then Rose refers to it as herself, which is a bit of a self-burn.
Yeah, I mean, you can get her perspective where this arc really is hammering home the differences between Rose and Blake, right?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
So this must be weighing on her so much, and more, as we'll get to, when her ritual doesn't really work.
Yeah, and there's this great bit. So then at the end, Blake and Rose kind of have to give speeches on their personal thing, basically selling it to the spirits, saying this is why this is important to me. And again, Blake's too busy with his own stuff to be snooping. So he only catches the final line of Rose's where she just says something like not a vestige. And I really want to know more about that. Like, was she talking about herself or? Yeah.
So
I want more
we found
info
out
on
about
that.
vestiges earlier in the arc, and so it's pretty easy to think that from Rose's lifeless Rose comment and her line there being about vestiges, that she's trying to sell herself as more than just a reflection.
Yeah, exactly.
So, ritual complete, and they have magic. It's what every 11-year-old boy in England dreams about. They can cast spells.
You're a wizard, Blake.
Yep, totally. But Rose does not become a witch, or she kind of does. It's a bit ambiguous. Rose's running theory is it worked for her, so she won't be able to tell lies, but she doesn't feel like there's any magic or spirits or energy on her side of the mirror. So she doesn't while she's a practitioner, she can't really use it in any meaningful way.
Yeah, and there's this great bit because they both try the movement spell to try it out, and it obviously works for Blake, and then Rose tries to do it, and it doesn't work, and her claim is partially because she doesn't actually have blood to offer, which both kind of informs me that the spell was powered by the spirits wanting to consume human blood, which is creepy on its own level. And then also just reminding you of how miserable Rose's existence kind of is, that she, not only does she not have blood or a real body, but it's at the point where all the spirits seem to be rejecting it, which is just an extra layer of fuck you on top of it.
Yeah, and she kind of understandably gets annoyed / upset by this and kind of half storms off. And Blake checks on Barbatorem and this time sees him. He climbs out of the shears and Blake's like, nope, not going to deal with this, and just leaves. And heads off to prepare for the council meeting.
I think they're both pretty reasonable. Like, Rose gets angry, but she doesn't really take it out on Blake like I think he has done a couple of times to her.
Yeah.
She's understandably upset, right? Because I think it was a long shot at best that this was going to work for her, but she doesn't really have anything else to pin her hopes on at this stage, so I kind of get that she would have done that. Barbatorem is just sort of sitting here as a bit of a Chekhov's gun, I guess. We're not using him yet, but he's been pretty well established this chapter, so I definitely have a feeling he'll be back.
I'm sure he won't be. I'm sure they'll just keep him up there in case they need him, and nothing bad will happen, and then the story will end.
Yeah, Arc 16, someone will be like, oh shit, yeah, Barbatorem, let's go.
Oh, we forgot about Barbatorem. Oh, well, we've converted that into our mansion now, so he'll just have to stay there. Anyway, so that's the end of Bonds 1.7. This episode, we decided we're going to highlight some comments from 5 years back again. So let's kind of dive into those.
Yeah, there's no need to do a monster corner because the chapter kind of already did it for us.
Yeah, totally. The chapter dove into Barbatorem a lot. A comment I really liked from 5 years ago was one from somebody called Zedadarian, which is an interesting name. But it kind of comes back to the idea of Blake's instincts as his method of survival.
Yeah.
We don't get much characterization on Molly, but we do know that she was reclusive and she kept to herself, and then she died after 4 months. And so Zedadarian is saying, Blake is taking risks. He is kind of playing things by ear a bit, but Molly was in this situation and she played it safe and she died. So Zedadarian is kind of defending Blake's approach as maybe it's a bit thoughtless at times, but it at least it's not exactly what Molly was doing, which was playing it too safe.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have the details on exactly how Molly ended up getting in danger and getting killed, but she definitely seemed like the type to play it safe, and this is kind of what Laird was talking about. They seemed like Molly seems like exactly the sort of person Laird would have wanted sitting there, like without knowing too much about her. So someone like Blake, who is just kind of a bit unorthodox or a bit unpredictable. It's such a shitty situation where I think Zedadarian's right. There's so much likelihood that he's going to die that someone who's kind of a bit more of a wild card, probably an asset to themselves.
Someone who takes risks. I mean, it's a low chance of success, but so is Blake's life in general, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so then I've picked a comment by Ace of Diamonds, just Ace Diamonds, who just sort of brought up the fact that he when Blake picked keys as his personal thing, that's not just symbolic for him, but I also liked the note that keys symbolize freedom, which Rose doesn't have. So it is just kind of differentiating them a bit, which I just thought was a great little insight. And then there's a response to that, just a couple of comments down by a user called Notes, who just kind of, they start talking, Notes and some people responding to him start talking about the difference between iron and holly berries, which were the two ingredients that differentiated their two rituals. And this sort of sent me down a bit of a rabbit hole, looking into the traditional symbolism of holly and also iron. And I have a feeling that this was all set up by Rose Senior. So holly's often depicted as something to do with protection, as well as fertility. So I have a feeling what Rose did was a spell not to really make her a practitioner in the sense that she can use magic, but probably something to protect her even more. Which makes a lot of sense given that she is the loophole that lets Blake have this place, so she probably needs to be protected. And you know, the whole thing of her not actually being able to do magic is classic collateral fuckery, as the two term Rose Senior's behavior. You know, she's not malicious. Just anything bad that happens to you is collateral, which is just seems like a perfect description of what we've seen so far.
Yeah, and Iron for Blake. I think Iron has come up a few times this arc. Every single time it's come up this arc, it's been in reference to Iron is great for fucking with others, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And it's traditionally something that is great at killing, you know, supernatural beings. So
Yep.
It seems like it's just being used to the same thing. But the substitution of that for Holly as a protection thing, you know, says to me that I have a feeling Rose Senior did it to help protect Rose Junior.
Interesting.
And this also, it's a bit of a callback to all of her wishes to be a witch hunter, like instead of a practitioner. I think it would kind of be a bit of irony that sort of thing ends up being done to her when she was trying to become a practitioner anyway.
Yeah, accidentally.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to call out one other comment which I liked, which was, you know, I think Wildbow readers will be familiar with the typo threads, where commenters hot off the presses will help point out typos that Wildbow has missed in his edits. And there's a specific typo thread here by W.M. Ager, who's just kind of talking about Latin usage. So it's a typo thread just for Latin words, where W.M. Ager kind of specifies, oh, this Latin word seems to be in the wrong tense. This one might be the wrong gender. This one seems a little odd as a translation. It's just a fun little comment where you learn about what Latin words mean and the little subtleties of the word choices.
It's a great because W.M. Ager sort of admits that this is just an overly nitpicky comment, but he just wants to bring it up because it's a pet peeve of his. It's a very interesting just sort of look into, you know, exactly how the rules of Latin work and you know, whether Wildbow's misusing them at all or not.
Yeah. So we will add links to all of those comments in the show notes down below, so you can check them out yourself and see some of the replies and kickstart the discussion. But that's going to do us for Bonds 1.7.
Yeah, that's everything. So as we sort of talked about, you know, just to repeat that announcement, the Pact audiobook available now on most of the good podcasting apps like iTunes and Google Play and Stitcher and all that. So go check that out as well. Speedchuck's doing a great job.
Yep. And if you want to check it out somewhere else, you can check it out on our website, which is mediamdpodcast.com, where you can also find other episodes of Deep Impact, as well as our other show, Media MD.
Yes. And so we'll also have a link in the notes here to a discussion thread on Reddit, where you can, you know, talk about this chapter and you know, I'm loving all the extra insights people are bringing each week, so please keep them coming. Yeah.
There's some great discussion in there last chapter, so make sure you're checking those out. Speaking of chapters, what's our next chapter, Elliot? We'll be coming back to talk about Bonds, the interlude, yeah.
Yes, our first interlude. And so that'll be on Monday, the 14th.
14th of January, so a few more days, and we will see you then. Or hear you? Speak to you.
Yeah, speak at you.
Speak at you, true.